It's so dark and I've been here for days. Wait, I see two forms in the distance. Two women.
Oh, yeah. Here we go, baby. I'm ready for another one. Are you ready for another one, Adam?
I'm really, if you're going to sing, I'm really ready for it.
Oh, it's Directorpiece Theater.
It really is.
You know,
it really is.
It's where we talk about, having been directors, you know, like what's up with directing, like that would be my definition. Yeah, what's up with that? So I'm Abe Epperson. I'm here with my co-host,
Adam Ganser.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Everyone.
Yeah. So if you clicked on today's episode, you are ready for some Roland Emmerich, the master of bombast, right? How many times have you watched this movie, this particular one?
Twice, maybe three.
Did you watch it in the
maybe
theater?
Three. No.
I
think I've seen it twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely didn't see it in theater.
Yeah. Did you think it was dumb when it came out? Like when you watch trailers, were you like, that's dumb?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, rewatching it, it's not as dumb because Roland Emmerich has outdumbed himself and other people have mimicked it. So he also did 2012, which is dumber. And he also did, or he didn't also do, but we have since done stuff like Geostorm.
Yeah, I know. I know, man.
So it's like we've gotten real dumb with this genre. So it actually isn't as dumb as some of the... Yeah, that's all I wish to say.
I agree. I mean, that's certainly going to be the starting point for our discussion, is because this is about the day after tomorrow. I'm hoping that we can kind of recover a little bit of our memory about how we felt about the film, and still kind of hold that in tension with the way it actually is now. Because one thing you have to remember about Roland Emmerich in particular is that this, epic disaster genre, which existed before him, he's kind of the master of it, right? He has, right?
Yeah.
It's kind
of the same way that James Cameron has cut a swath of action movie. There's action movies and there's James Cameron action movies. Mm-hmm. He has definitely made when you're watching a Roland Emmerich film and they all kind of look and feel the same way.
Yeah.
And he's done so many of them at this point and they've kind of had amazing success. Independence Day, obviously.
That's the big one. But also, just to get right into it, he went on a roll that was a pretty impressive catalog of films for about 10 years. And it started with Stargate, which is a little different than the rest of his movies, but also still very fun...
Love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost did an episode of this, how that was sort of a Spielberg film, like him trying to do a Spielberg film, because it feels like that. But he kind of pivoted to, I think, the mainstay of what Roland Emmerich's going to be remembered for, which is this epic disaster genre after that with Independence Day. And then he was brought on to Godzilla. He sort of rescued that project. I'm going to put rescued in quotes. He took that project over after there was some tension with Jan de Bont and saw that all the way through. And then he made The Patriot with Mel Gibson, which is kind of a Braveheart, a B-side of Braveheart. And then he followed that up
lightning in the bottle again.
Right? Isn't that what it is? Isn't it B-side Braveheart?
Yeah, it's absolutely what it is. It's not. It's like Braveheart light.
Yeah. It's not as good,
but equally as long. We're gonna take the same amount to give you a lukewarm version of Braveheart.
It's microwave Braveheart. I completely agree with that. But it's the same beats. I mean, it's clearly not trying to be. It's not carving any new territory. Whereas I would argue that, in some ways, Independence Day, Godzilla, and this movie, The Day After Tomorrow, are all kind of pushing a genre forward. That epic disaster genre.
Okay.
Forward.
All right. I'm ready for this journey. Man.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. So I'm going to jump right into it. So let's acknowledge right up top, the thing that makes Roland Emmerich great is that he is a master of spectacle, right? His movies up to that point, and in some ways, maybe even still, are the pinnacle of destruction on a mass scale, right? Certainly there's been Marvel movies and stuff that have rivaled it, but I feel you watch these movies and there's still creator. Like a, my God, we're destroying everything kind of vibe to it.
Yeah, he's the creator of the blow up the thing.
Yeah.
Do the Capitol building.
Yeah. No, do the Capitol building, man. No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what he does.
Yeah, now do the pyramids. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's blowing it up. That is what he does. So, like, imagine in 2004 when you've had that much success doing this, the pressure that you're under to make a movie like The Day After Tomorrow, because number one, he probably feels an amount of pressure to deliver box office success. Even Godzilla, though it was kind of considered a box office disappointment, was still successful. And Stargate and Independence Day obviously were massive hits. And they were massive zeitgeist movies. Like, everybody remembers them. We all flocked to the theater to see them.
They're summer movies, yeah.
Yeah, these were like...
built with the intention to print money.
Yeah, he was... I mean, right? That's what he did. And that's a certain kind of filmmaker. Not all filmmakers can do it. It's one of the reasons why, for instance, Stanley Kubrick was such a huge fan of Steven Spielberg. Because he just admired how Spielberg was able to make successful movies financially, consistently.
That's right. He's like, you have the finger on the pulse of whatever the hell America is.
Yeah, and he was right. I mean, and I think for at least 10, 15 years, Roland Emmerich also kind of had that pulse. So he has to make a movie that sort of matches up to that expectation, right? So the expectation being successful, a massive zeitgeist movie, and delivering destruction on the scale that we're accustomed to from Roland Emmerich. That's the expectation.
Man, scale, baby. That's Roland Emmerich's game.
Yeah, that's what he does, right? So when you think about that, it's pretty clear that Roland Emmerich really cares about the climate change cause. And here's why I'm saying that. So, like, this movie comes out in 2004. That is before the movie Inconvenient Truth comes out, which is 2006. And I think it's fair to say that as in a public sort of group consciousness way, Inconvenient Truth is the first time that we as moviegoers sort of were willing to hear stories or the story of climate change and accept it. I think before that, there was a mixed feeling about it. Some people were like open to that, mainstream. Some people were not, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's so funny we're still dealing with this problem.
I mean, we are still, like, of course there's still gonna be people who are like, this is not real.
But I just don't wish to distract. We are 2006, 2004,
right?
Or 2004, 2006. Yeah.
Right. That's like 17 years ago when this movie came out, The Day After Tomorrow, and 15 years or whatever when Inconvenient Truth came out. But I think it's fair to say, like, the cultural attitude toward this in media changed with Inconvenient Truth. Like, that was, I think, a perception changer. So the fact that Roland Emmerich made a movie about this topic tells you how passionate he was about it, because it was not an instant winner. You know, like, it's not an alien destroying the planet. It's not a gigantic monster tearing through the city. It's not.
It's us.
Yeah.
It's man.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also a diffuse, difficult concept to explain. So he kind of took a lot on himself to make this movie. And I think if you need any proof to show that sort of people writ large were not ready to accept the premise of this movie, I think you can sort of go through and, like, skim critical responses and the pervasive sense that they thought it was silly, as not necessarily untrue, but as, like, they were very dismissive of the premise. You know, they just weren't ready to accept the premise. And Roland Emmerich took kind of a big risk to make a movie about that.
There's a lot of laughable aspects of it. The fact that it happens in, like, a few days, you know, like, it's like, and they're like so wrong. They're like 50 to 100 years. And then then the time, that's where they start by saying, like, this is
right.
It's alarmist, but like 50. Oh no, it's like 50 to 1,000 years. And then it turns into
minutes,
6 to 8 weeks, and then it becomes literally now.
Yeah, 50 minutes.
And it's just like, oh, okay. They really jumped. They really jumped in on that. That makes it feel silly.
It does,
even though, you know, some of the science behind it is like, okay, let's look at this.
Right. I do not want to go on record as saying this movie is not silly, because it is. But I think that you can still kind of get a feeling from the general response that not only is it silly, therefore we can't accept it. Because, like, honestly, every Alien movie is also silly. I think it's silly. We're not totally ready to accept the premise exactly. And, like, even just this topic as a premise for a disaster movie, I don't think they were totally ready to accept it. Also, I think he cared enough about the issue that he was willing to make specific, obvious political commentary as a part of the story. Like, he very obviously cast an actor who was supposed to be a Dick Cheney stand-in and a George Bush stand-in. A thing that most movies just choose to not do. You know, like they just choose not to comment on the current president. Even during the Trump era, they chose to do that. So the fact that he's like, I'm going to obviously make these analogs and stand-ins tells you he wants to make a point. This matters to him, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And also he paid the price for that
he's
decision.
Going for the jugular, baby.
Critical eye. They were not into that decision. So look, right. They didn't think that was good. Fair enough. So, like, if you're Roland Emmerich, and again, you're the bombasser of puppets, twisting your mind and shattering your scenes, how do you do a climate change movie and still do the mass destruction thing that you're known for? Like, this is a problem that he has, how to set up this premise and still deliver the action movie, but not entirely violate the cause to do it. That's the tension that he's in. And I think The Day After Tomorrow is his attempt to sort of reconcile those two things. And I think it's fair to say that he made a flawed film because of that. Because those two passions, the let's make a disaster movie spectacle and let's do a decent job with the actual climate change cause, are kind of irreconcilable. And I think there's moments when I watch this movie that I wish that Roland Emmerich had seen the movie Inconvenient Truth before he made this, because it might have made him more effective at setting up the premise, even of a silly movie like this, which, believe it or not, is kind of what I want to talk about. Just sort of, how does Roland Emmerich approach setting up this climate change story? And how does he do it, like, visually and narratively and just those elements? And, like, is there anything storytelling-wise that we could have learned from Inconvenient Truth that might have made his job easier?
Do you mean like tactics or like tactics-wise in storytelling?
Almost exclusively tactics. Almost exclusively, because
your methodology for, like, proving a point.
Yes,
if you have
persuasion.
A thesis statement, getting us to your thesis statement.
Correct. Like that. Like I want to talk basically about how does he set up this premise to do a fiction film about this subject, and just knowing that Inconvenient Truth is right around the same time, like a couple years later, what other storytelling tactics we can learn about how to set up this story that may have improved his movie, or that may have made his movie stand the test of time as a more serious endeavor a little better. Although I'm happy to say now, when I watched it now, I did not find it laughable like I probably would have in 2004. Like, I took it a little more seriously now. So I think maybe zeitgeist alone helps this movie. What do you think of that? Like, that is true or no?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't call it zeitgeist as much as, like, historical perspective.
Yeah, fair enough.
We know the reality of, like, there's a line that Quaid says at one point, which is, like, our children will be feeling the ramifications of this. And it's kind of like, it's grandiose because what he's saying in that moment is like, they're going to have a complete climate change. But for us, relatively, we see all of the, like, every summer killing the previous summer in terms of the records of heat or droughts, and we see it formulating, and it's not bad yet, and it isn't as fast yet, but it's still bad, and it's not trending in the right direction. So we're like, the proof is in the pudding. It becomes all too real now once we start seeing the slow kind of burning of the frog in the pot, like, we realize, and it's kind of hellish, the daunting dread that we have about this issue, which I think at this point, even just, 10 years ago-ish, like, we're talking about, like, they didn't have that kind of perspective. So it isn't as dread inducing.
Right. Because it is more effective.
They didn't feel it yet.
Yeah. it is more effective in 2021 probably than it was in 2004. Like, just I think period because of our historical perspective. I think that's absolutely accurate. I just want to go.
But Jake Gyllenhaal fighting wolves is funny.
Yeah, the wolves are completely indefensible.
Fucking love the wolves.
I thought they were absurd.
They're absurd. They're great.
Yeah, right. They're great for the dumb reason. I totally agree. Now, look.
But yeah, you were pointing out like the ridicule, the difference in the ridicule, like why we laugh at it. Yeah, you're very nuanced thing you're doing right now.
I'm going to be walking a little bit of a tightrope here. I understand that people are probably instantly going, wait a minute, you can't compare Inconvenient Truth with Day After Tomorrow because Inconvenient Truth is a documentary. I completely agree with that. I'm not talking.
You're not comparing it as much as saying. Well, okay. I'll let you continue.
Thank you for just rising up to defend me, you beautiful man.
Yeah, man, I see what you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So just to clarify one more time. So like I'm using just visual tactics of Inconvenient Truth because I think it's a persuasive visual story that it tells, and saying like what elements of that might have helped Day After Tomorrow to be more compelling on the topic. That's the idea. Because as you'll see, they sort of go fly in the face of the bombastic storyteller, which is what Roland Emmerich is committed to being. So to start, I think the first major point I want to make is that we have a major contrast between the two films. And one of them is that there is the power of dramatization of this kind of content versus the power of a graph for expositing how to explain to the audience how climate change works. Okay. Because there's two different approaches. So, just, this, but just run through it very quickly. The Day After Tomorrow chooses to make a fictional dramatized story about climate change. And that's how it's going to tell you all the facts you need to know about climate change. And Inconvenient Truth is like, we're going to give you data and stats. So because Emmerich is a fiction storyteller, one of the things that he probably feels in his bones, because most directors do, is you never want to make your audience have to read or watch an analytical piece of data. That is like antithetical to fiction storytelling, because the core engine of fiction storytelling is emotional. This is a thing we talk about all the time on this podcast. Now, I don't want to say that that's not true of documentaries, because it is, but documentaries often approach like their subjects more analytically to get their emotional content, and we sort of understand that about them. So we're willing to sort of go down that road as an experience. So they are both fundamentally emotional, but like movies, you're not going to stand there and read a big pile of text. You're never going to do that. In fact, it's such a problem that movies in this day and age are constantly trying to find ways to make you not have to look at things that are blocks of text, such as...
Always.
Yeah, always. Such as...
Except for the silent era where they couldn't tell you.
Well, but as soon as they could, they ditched it, right? Like
then it was all talkies
all
the time.
Talkies, yeah, they didn't go backwards. So like, this is why we have so many shows trying to find interesting ways to show you smartphone apps and text messages. So like, if you watch a movie now,
sure,
if you're looking at an actual screen, reading a piece of text or looking at an app, that's a very slim percentage chance that's happening, because that's a boring way to consume that. So what you often see more regularly now in films is like overlap graphics on screen, or text being written on screen as the character's typing it, so that you get not only the information, but also the emotional experience of the person creating it. This is why shows like House of Cards or Sherlock have tried very hard to create visual motifs to make that aspect of storytelling more engaging. And now it's pretty pervasive. I can't remember the last current movie that had a screenshot of an actual phone screen.
Yeah.
So Roland Emmerich then has this challenge where he has to communicate a lot of data, like data that's like pretty texty and like factual, but he has to do it through scenes. So what does he do? He creates an accelerated ice age to basically outline the kinds of results we might see from climate change, right? So that's how he chooses to approach this issue. And that, of course, is going to include tornadoes and freezing helicopters and like biblical plague style hail. And the most important thing, a tidal wave that destroys the city of New York. Because if he doesn't destroy New York, we have not Roland Emmerich. So
yeah, it's true.
So he has to dramatize this stuff instead of explaining it to us for us to experience the emotions of it. So this is why in the first act he has to kind of jump between all these little various ramping up vignettes to kind of communicate the different aspects of climate change in a way that we can palate. So, like, that means in the opening sequence, in order to communicate, the glaciers are falling apart. There's an Arctic shelf, right? And, like, we're losing water. In order to communicate that, we have cliffhanger on the Arctic shelf, right? Like, that's the first scene. And then, like, we follow that with essentially a climate summit where the world leaders are skeptical, so we kind of get to dump exposition. And we get one single graphic. The only graphic that actually explains in any visual way what is going on in the world.
The science of it all.
The science of it all. Yeah. We get one graphic, and it has to be done in
it's little arrows on an ocean.
Yeah, right. And therefore, you have to have all these world leaders. I'm sorry. Did you say climate change? Because I thought we were worried about warming. You know, we get those guys.
Yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah. That's my favorite.
Right.
Wait, so is it global colding now?
Right, he has to do that, right?
Go fuck yourself.
And those lines only, again, Roland Emmerich's also the screenwriter of this. So, like, he has to do this because he has to do the actual data work. He has to explain it to us. And the audience doesn't know the difference. Probably in 2004, they don't know the difference between global warming and climate change. So he needs a person to yell that at Dennis Quaid so that he can explain it to you.
So he can say it's the difference.
Right. Now, like, just as a whole, to step all the way back and like think about this approach to making us feel the reality of climate change. Like, there is something about destroying New York City with a tidal wave that is terrifying. Like, it's a very awe-inspiring spectacle, and it does create a certain kind of dread that I think is effective. Like, I don't think that people are cheering for the tidal wave in the theater. I think they're like, oh my god, you know, like it's very sobering.
Right. But it's still a facsimile, and people know that.
I agree, and that's the thing. Let's talk about that at the end of this episode, because I think that's a really important point. Because what you're going to ask, and you're right, is like, but is it truly effective? And I think that's a totally valid question. The other upside to Roland Emmerich's approach here is that he uses, because he's dramatization, like he's doing a dramatization, he uses family relationships to help us imagine personal contact points with the impact of climate change. Mm-hmm. So, like, we can imagine losing our son in New York, right? Or we can imagine having a sick relative in a hospital who can't get out. Or we can imagine, you know, our uncle dying in a bus or whatever, you know.
It's what movies are great at, which is emotionally resonating something with you.
Correct. And I would say Jake Gyllenhaal's experience overall is pretty moving. And it's pretty scary.
He's good.
Yeah.
He's good.
And, you know, at the end, I think that we agree Ice Ages are mostly chill negative by the time we're done watching this experience.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah, for real, man.
Yeah, for real, man. Ice Ages suck, bro.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
Breaking news. Ice Ages are bad. But
I love the foreshadowing that they do with the woolly mammoth.
I like that too.
They're like, there's food still in his belly.
He froze instantly.
He froze instantly. Yeah. Cut to helicopters freezing instantly.
And I thought that was a cool invention of this film. I don't know that I would say invention entirely, but like that was a cool aspect of this experience that the film capitalized on.
It was cool. It was chill positive. It was chill
positive. Yeah, very positive for chill. So there's that. Now, what I want to add to this is, so that's the approach Emmerich takes, but I want to take a look at something from Inconvenient Truth as sort of a contrasting point, and that is Inconvenient Truth, I think, proved visually graphs can be very dramatic. I think that's probably the most standout fact about that documentary is like they made very dramatic use of graphs. The best one, of course, being Al Gore's CO2 graphic, where he shows the history of temperature and CO2. And then he climbs on that giant lift and shows our carbon
like Skyjack,
spiking way the hell up there. And again, that's a very bombastic decision for a documentary. Like, let's not minimize that. It's very much a drama storytelling moment. But like the graph tells everything. You're like, you just look at the graph and you're like, moment, oh my God.
All of America and witnessing that moment, like, I got a serious hard-on for graphs now.
I got that graph.
No, you're wrong though. They can be compelling because if you are expecting, like, what's great about it also is that the setup is like, it's set up like a TED Talk, if I recall, right? So it's like,
mostly, yeah.
It seems like Al Gore's gonna just, mind-numbingly tell you about like what the science is, because he's like, let's, that was this whole deal. And then he shows you something that's so dramatic that you go like, whoa,
yeah,
that can't be good.
Yeah, that looks very
and
bad.
That's all it really is.
Yeah.
That's all it really is. It's just like, look at the difference between these lines. It's like simple elementary school shit.
It really is. And yet I think it sort of tells you that if the information being presented is dramatic enough, and guys, the climate change information is definitely dramatic enough, the facts are actually more powerful as emotional content for their own sake than they are as drama fodder. Like, the drama fodder actually reduces the impact of the facts. And I think that's something that we learned from this documentary. It's rare, but there are times that an analytical tool like a graph, like an actual spreadsheet or something, can be more powerful than a scene in which it's explained tensely to world leaders. Right? Like, and it's not like they have to
I agree I'll wait. I'll keep this till the end too.
No, go ahead. You can make it.
You're right.
Go ahead and make the point. Right. I'm interested. Go ahead.
I think that you're right for 2006 to 2012, 14. Now information doesn't have, like, it had this wonderful time where, like, I felt like some of the people were listening, but not really, because then people just fought the facts. Like this. Now we have a disinformation situation where it's like, okay, so now they don't. Not even that's compelling. They just want to disagree. But that has entirely different. That has to deal with the politics of learning, I guess. Good Lord, and it's just something that I think it affects both the storytelling, in this case of Inconvenient Truth, more so because it's prevalent on factual information being like the setup, and like therefore when the awe happens, when the lean forward moment, quote end quote, like, is basically done and designed around this is all true, that is absolutely nullified, and to much less extent, but also Day After Tomorrow, it's just like, it's just make 'em ups, and it's all based off lies anyway. People can say this shit and get away with it, and it's like, oh, fuck that.
For sure.
But, whatever.
No, you're right.
I'm not here to say Day After Tomorrow needs to be fought for from a righteous, factual perspective. I'm just saying the way in which media influences us seems to be in flux to such an extent that your point is very well made, but it seems to be less and less true as time goes on too.
Yeah, because now we have a problem of will the audience accept the premise on like a meta level, period.
Yeah, exactly.
Which storytelling tactics are not going to fix for the most part.
Get around. Yeah. No, yeah.
But and you're absolutely right, and that is a part of the climate change conversation 100%. But I still think that if the audience is amenable to a statement of facts, like enough that they'll listen, that I think that Inconvenient Truth, the simplicity of some of these visual representations, like of data, like they really did a nice job with that. And it could be incorporated into fictionalization. You know what I mean? Like, I think Roland Emmerich could have shown us graphs, could have shown us actual data in a compelling way that would have felt more authentic than doing it through kind of a well-trod narrative territory that's, just people saying the facts instead of seeing them on screen. So I kind of like Inconvenient Truth as a rebuttal for visual aids.
It's a different tactic that's also very effective.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways more effective, I think you can argue. So next I want to transition into, so how does Roland Emmerich actually emotionally prepare you for the big moments which are meant to make us like, wow, man, climate change. So like specifically, how does he prepare you for the tidal wave rolling through New York City or the tornadoes rolling through Los Angeles? I think those are like the two big things that sort of represent moving toward this is happening now. To do this, he uses some really great directorial tactics. One of them is he creates a kind of language through lens choice and motion. So in this movie, until he gets to like the big reveals, he uses a lot of mid-range and long lenses to facilitate the exposition. And what I mean by that is he's on like a 50 maybe to like maybe a 75 to 100. Like he's in that range. And what that does is it lets it, as you guys know now probably, it compresses the space a little bit, which gives us foreground and background elements. And you'll see this all throughout.
Closer together.
Yes, and they're closer together, right? So it sort of smashes stuff together. And you'll notice what he does using those things is then he begins to create motion in front of and behind the subject constantly. He's constantly making things move in front of or behind the character on screen. Why? Because he's implying the threats, the storms, the weather are behind and in front of you. They're right next to you, and they're already in motion, right? So there's a sense of foreboding. Like you really feel it during the exposition scenes. You really feel it during like the hail scene or like the rain stuff that leads up to the tidal wave. There's a lot of
I noticed it too. Like our subjects are standing still. Everyone else is moving around.
Which again is a really good metaphor. You have like your character standing still, but the weather is swirling around them like it's a storm, and that's cool. You know what I mean? That's a really cool filmmaker.
If you're gonna do something,
for sure. So again, like the combined effect here is to visually represent the threat, so that instead of it being explained conceptually, he tries to visualize it, which is what a good director would do. It also has the effect that like the Steadicam in Dark Knight has, which is kind of like the story's moving forward. The story feels sort of inevitable, like it's all going to happen, and like the characters are sort of scrambling to keep up the whole time. He creates that effect through these visual tropes. Now, this all shifts when we get to the tidal wave. The tidal wave, and to some degree the tornadoes, we move away from these long lenses and these lateral movements into wide lenses, right? So now we're talking about like, not to a warping degree, but probably like, 1825, like pretty big wide angle lenses so you can see the whole spectacle. And perhaps most importantly, we start to get a lot more clear action on the Z axis, meaning straight at camera. Right, most of the death scenes that happen, specifically with the tidal wave, happen on the Z-axis. People getting run over, cars rolling over, people drowning in the bus as they're seeing it happen in the rearview mirror. Right, so now instead of the storm swirling around you, it is now coming right for you. And
it's personal.
Yeah, it's and it's like, hey, that's the classic filmmaker thing to do. It super works, and it creates a lot of impact. Right? Like I feel like even when I'm watching the tidal wave swoop through New York in a lateral way, I'm like, wow. You know what I mean? Like you really stop and go, wow. I think it's still
it's
really
literally
works.
One of the first tricks we figured out when we created moving images,
right.
Like Great Train Robbery. People are like, the train's going to fucking kill me. Or the guy pointing the gun at you and people going like, I know it's all make them up, but it's still very uneasy.
Yeah.
Like I didn't like a gun pointed at me. Now we don't give a shit because it's like, it's a part of our visual.
We're used to it.
Visual lexicon, but like ultimately, these tactics still do work to a lot of extent.
They still work even if the effect is a little muted. And I think the use of contrast here also shows you a lot about what directors do, as like in a sleight of hand. Like he uses one entire set of language as a prep, and then he switches it right when the big action thing hits, and it's like, oh, you feel the impact of that switch.
Right.
And yet it never feels like a different movie. So, there's a lot of talent going here. Now, I think this is an interesting contrast to look at that, right? All that sort of like visual metaphorical work, and then contrast what Inconvenient Truth did to prepare the audience for the facts that they were going to deliver. So the beginning of Inconvenient Truth, aside from like the Al Gore story, which is, I think less important, the beginning is they start with a satellite picture of planet Earth, and it was taken by the Apollo, and like they show the first ever one, and then they show the most popular one ever. And that seems like a very simple, maybe even sentimental idea. But why do they do it? Because, and I think you can't help but feel this, when you look at planet Earth from space and realize, hey, here we are, just a rock hurtling through space, you get a very visceral feeling of, wow. Right? Like it's very awe-inspiring, and it's very beautiful. It's just a thing that we all connect to. The beauty and the awe of the world we live on is a natural, fundamental human experience, and it's primal, right? And ultimately, in order to make anything emotionally efficient, you need to draw on primal human experiences because they are the tent poles that make the engine run. Like this is a thing they teach you in film school, and it never stops being true. And so Inconvenient Truth's like, well, how about we go to the source of all this, planet Earth. The place you love, the place we all in our guts love, it's in danger. And it's very effective. And like, what's fascinating about that, I'm sorry, I know you want to say something. Go for it.
No, I just wanted to say the thing that you're talking about is an actual cognitive effect by astronauts. They talked about it. It's called the overview effect, and it doesn't extend to just, it's like seeing something in overview, seeing the table of contents of reality. I just thought
that's cool.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we have like said, it's a thing.
That's great. Now, just so you don't think I'm like flying in with a different idea to like fix Roland Emmerich's film, Roland Emmerich also used this in Day After Tomorrow, but he used it at the end. So at the end, right after all this stuff has happened, we go back to space with the astronauts, and what do we see? The glacier, the changed planet. Yeah. Now this is the new stasis. So instead of having the awe and the beauty of it, there's kind of a feeling of tragedy that he wants to leave us with. Now, it's just interesting to me that that's what he chose to do, because the way that he introduces the subject for us is to give us this like swooping, I think partially or maybe entirely CG shot of the Arctic glaciers, which are pretty standard, like cool, like flying through the Arctic stuff, and it is cool. But he skipped like the core of what makes us care about this, which is it's not fear, it's love. It's love for the planet that is like the motivator, and he has to basically replace that with this father-son dynamic that sort of is the emotional core of his movie, right? So now I'm not saying that having a father-son dynamic is bad. It's not bad. It's good. We've talked about a lot of films on this podcast where like, hey, sneakily, these action films are actually family movies. So I don't have a problem with him doing that here, but it's intriguing to think that The Inconvenient Truth kind of had a more direct and more effective setup for the emotions of their story, and it was much simpler. And Roland Emmerich is like sort of struggling to find, I'm going to put struggling in quotes, sort of laboring to create those same effects through a bunch of different dramatization methods, when he could very easily have just started with Planet Earth. He could have started there, and like, it works. We care. So I just find that very interesting. Also, by the way, the last line of the movie is like, "Have you ever seen the air so clear?" Like, it's very
talking about the cold indifference of nature.
Right. Yeah. It's very preachy, but like, again, it seems very clear to me that Roland Emmerich understood that at the end of the day, the beauty of Planet Earth is the motivator, like is the thing that gets the audience out of their chair. And but he kind of uses it to mixed effect here as more like cautionary tale.
Right. As a kind of slap on the wrist of like, here is Mother Earth correcting our like a literal mother slapping our wrists saying like, don't do that, you stop it, I'm gonna correct you. And that's the cautionary tale. And
it's not that that's a wrong thing to do, it's just that like, and I like parable movies, but like, I think again, the simplicity of the inconvenient truth is actually it's an easy thing to overlook, how simple it is to do this primal, hey man, this is what this movie's about stuff. But like, you do have to do it. It's why a lot of movies that have like bad romance plots, it just feels very tacked on. But then once in a while you have a movie that does the same romance plot beats, like in an action movie or whatever, and yet it really works. You know, like again, Die Hard is a good example of that, or just, I think even Lethal Weapon. Lethal Weapon has a great family plot all the way through it that really matters. And then a bunch of movies that imitate are like, oh yeah, and then he has a wife and then he has a kid, and you don't care, right? Because they like they didn't believe in the primal thing, but we still do as a movie audience. So anyway, that's a pulpit I like to get behind all the time. So you know I love it. So look, like, let me just like wrap it up here. In hindsight, I personally appreciate what Roland Emmerich's trying to do with this movie, because he's willing to risk his career a little bit for this cause. I really admire that. Like, I think it's good for cinema in general to take on issues like this and to take stands on issues like this, because we do, as a country and as a just globe, need to think about these issues, and movies are one of the big avenues for thought like that. I don't even think it's a bad thing per se to take bombastic swings on issues to sell movie tickets when there are exposure deficits, right? When like people may not be thinking about this issue as much. This may not be an example of that, but I'm not like principally like, no, a blockbuster should never exist about this topic. I don't think that. I think it's possible to do a good job of that. But I think it's really instructive for myself, for all people who are interested in making films or listening to this podcast, to consider that like there are actually simple, evocative ways to do exposition and to set up stories with complicated themes like this that don't require really sexy, big, bombastic decision making. Like, sometimes it is easier to show a picture of planet Earth or to show a graph. Sometimes that is a more powerful tool. And like, don't shrink back from doing it because it's simple and obvious. You know, sometimes like, hey man, use the simple thing that works instead of trying to manufacture the same effect and show off how good you are at it. You know, even Roland Emmerich, as talented and capable and accomplished as he is, could stand to be simpler from time to time. So, that's my argument. I
think there's a lot of really good things to be said. Good argument, man. Emmerich is something I think we don't give credit to Emmerich for, and I think you acknowledge very well, and I kind of want to expound on it. Roland Emmerich's like superpower, I think, is like, I really meant it when I said it at the very top of this podcast. He's like scale is his bag. Yeah. He is the filmmaker of scale. Yeah, absolutely. He's very good he's very tuned to the appropriateness of every moment for how where you put the camera. And that's the job of a director, ultimately. There's a reason he became like there's a reason like he and like other people like Michael Bay and other like people who like were the foundational like pens in a language of like, okay, we do that when we want to show that, or that's like how the genre shows visually these types of things occur. Like, and he's very good at it. Not only does he work with miniatures, so he's literally filmmaking wise, if we want to talk about tactics, very effective at creating something very small to look very big, or vice versa. Like he knows just fundamentally the toolkit and the tool that he's using, the camera and its lens, how to manipulate the image in order to make you think it looks like something. That has nothing to do with like the Luma narrative of like him making stories about that, but it's just something to add, is that he obviously pays attention to it. I think he's also kind of like, he does a pretty good job with telling like basic human survival stories. Like they're inoffensive and they work. You know what I mean? Like yeah, I think he's got some weird politics too. Sure. And there's some real old guy like old world, especially with women in his films. But that's like let another podcast talk about that. I feel like most people we're talking to already think about this with Roland Emmerich anyway. Like, but in terms of the directorial perspective and how he kind of navigates the space, I keep bringing up old. I guess we both do. We keep bringing up old director-piece theater topics like or movies like Speed. There's a section in Speed that it's like literally Jan de Bont is like taking from Roland Emmerich, right? Which is that there's a sequence where Jeff Daniels is spoilers for Speed. He's at Dennis Hopper's like house, and he like opens up and realizes that it's a ruse. He planted a bomb and I'm dead. There's like this moment, right, where Harry dies from the bomb. And then usually when people when you imagine that segment, and if you haven't seen Speed, I bet you can still recall like this one cut, which is that it's a shot, a pretty extreme close-up of his face. And he's like, oh, fuck, basically, is the expression. Then it cuts to a wide shot, exterior, and you see the house blow up, right? That's a very simple tactic. I know what's about to happen. It happened. Yep. And to present those with, here's a close-up to get you into the moment of pre-death and be like, oh, what a tragedy, to set you up with the punchline of, and then the tragedy happened. And we're outside looking in. We're as distant as we can be. It's just another statement. It's just a house blowing up. But because you gave me the shot that preceded it, it now becomes an effective sequence. Roland Emmerich basically created this shit. He basically was like the first director to do that tactic, and he does it in every single one of his movies.
Really?
It's every time there's a huge explosion, it's preceded by a shot of someone's face.
Yeah, like the
Why?
surprise.
Because he wants to connect you, because he's dealing with scale. What Roland Emmerich is very good at is the ability to say that jumping between scales from the middle distance to the wide distance to the close distance, those each embedded within themselves because of your connection to the subject, have a different thing to say. Are you neutral? Or are you with them? Or are you outside of them? And that's a fundamentally obvious kind of, that seems like very organic and true all the time with filmmaking. Roland Emmerich understands this, and he cuts consistently with that in mind. He's a filmmaker of scale. That's why he makes these sweeping things. That's his thing he wants to do, is talk about scale. And he does it in all his movies. And so when you brought up the pale blue dot stuff, where you're seeing the world, or like the overview effect, very effective as a filmmaking tool. Why? Because it's fundamentally something that happens to people. When they look at something with the distance, they go, oh shit, this is silly, or oh shit, this is much more amazing, and look at the majesty of it. Like you have different realizations with it. What was important and necessary for you to have that breakthrough was the distance from which you perceived it. So yeah, I agree with you, and I think he's very good at it. And he doesn't get enough credit.
He's great at jumping into an intimate moment and then out to, and then the whole building exploded.
Right. Like Stargate had it. Like when we see Ra blows up, and then you cut to the pyramid, blows up. Yep. Same thing as Speed. I'm telling you, man.
I mean,
it's all the same shit. We do the same kind of things over and over and
over. I mean, I'll never forget the first time I watched Independence Day in the theater, because like Titanic, or like a lot of movies that did this kind of epic disaster thing, like he found a lot of really great tiny little vignettes that it's like, and then this person died, and then you meet them and see what they're trying to do, and then they died. Like that's one of the things he's just so good at, that does actually humanize tragedy on that scale. Like it is effective for that, because otherwise, to use sort of the exact opposite point I've been saying this whole episode, it is just a statistic that is not emotionally evocative, right? Like, and that's the thing you never want to be as a disaster filmmaker or a scale filmmaker, is like, and then the tidal wave went through, imagine all those bodies. No, man, we can't imagine them. We got to see them.
We don't see them. Yeah. I on that topic, because that's a very good distinction. I want to ask you the question you kind of alluded to before, which I think is good, which is, did you think that the movie, by making it so loud and, you know, kind of bombastic as you put it, move back the thought process and the kind of acceptance of what his, like, fundamentally he's trying to say with it? Did it move it back in the zeitgeist? No. Like, I think...
No, not backwards.
You don't think
not
it
backwards,
did?
No.
You don't think it... You think that people, on balance, when they came out of Day After Tomorrow, were more worried about climate change than they were?
I don't know. I think he didn't set it backwards. I think that people who are worried about climate change that went to Day After Tomorrow did not stop being worried about climate change.
So you don't think that the laughability that you also alluded to of people walking out of the theater and being like, that was so silly, because they, you know, weren't ready for it, I guess, or whatever. It's not like it's speaking truth to power or something, but like, you know what I mean? Like, because people were like, this is over the top. You don't think that that set anything
I don't know.
back?
I mean, to me, you can make the argument both ways. I mean, there's no data for either of these things.
There's absolutely no way for us to tell.
But like, you can make the argument either way. You can make the Lear's Fool argument too, right? Where it's like, look, this is the only palatable way we had to discuss it. So like, just even putting it in the theater at all and asking people to see it at all, just the exposure to the ideas might have been a net positive. Because again, 2 years later, Inconvenient Truth actually shaped American perspective about this. And it's not like that movie exists in a vacuum. It doesn't.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not saying that Day After Tomorrow is the reason Inconvenient Truth works at all. But I'm saying, like, if we're measuring how much this helped to hurt the cause, I can't really believe it hurt the cause that much. Because very soon thereafter, the cause took a major step forward. You know?
Yeah, I think that the proof is in, you know, the perspective, the history, the scale, someone could say. We now can look back and say, yeah, it did. I mean, I can't say if we would have gone faster without the film.
Right.
Once again, these are all not data points. But I just think it's interesting to discuss, at least, like, is it more important is there such a thing as bad publicity, I guess?
For climate change,
what we're talking about.
For climate change in 2004, I think the answer was no.
I think so. I think you're right to bring up the context. I think you're right to say in that time with those kind of parameters and that thing happening, it was a good thing and on balance. And I think you're right about that. I think that answers my question.
Yeah. I mean, again, I have the benefit of being 17 years in the future and knowing that I'm about to experience a summer where 100-degree days are going to be part of it pretty regularly. And where there's going to be hurricanes, soon, like stuff that seemed impossible is going to happen.
Right.
So,
right. Some people know this about me. I'm pretty into in learning about the environmental quote unquote debate about like what's going on. And I got it because I had, like most of us, like you have a teacher who was just so good. One of those teachers that was just so good was my AP environmental science teacher. Point being that right at the I was coming off of that class. That was like when I was like a senior. This is 2004, and I like graduated from like high school in like 2003 or whatever it was. And so I'm like got an axe to grind. Crazy environmentalist. I remember coming out of this movie and being kind of pissed, being like, they really did it dirty. And like, I felt I wasn't militant about it, I guess. I wasn't like pissed off to the point of doing something, or I just kind of was like, fuck that movie a little bit, because they're making it look laughable and silly and like it could never happen because it's such a fictionalization of like, the real shit is like it had it involved there. But then it, like, as I was doing research for this, the last Directorpiece theater that I did, which was the Twister one, there's meteorologists who were they were interviewing meteorologists, or like Bill Paxton was saying he was talking to some meteorologists or weather men and women after Twister, because it was such a, zeitgeisty film. And he said almost unanimously the response was like, because he was like, I felt like it was really stupid, like when I pick up the sand and I'm like, look at this fucking thing. Like, I think that I'm setting you guys back. I'm making you guys look foolish. And they were like almost unanimously, nah, man, we are really excited to be in a movie. You know, like our profession is never in movies, so it's the representation matters. And I think that that's right, because I, for one, was a kid who like got into like learning what the clouds were named because of Twister. So I think a lot, like you were saying, can be said about Day After Tomorrow in terms of climatologists, probably young climatologists, soon to be climatologists, watch that film and are like, I'm fascinated by it for some reason. And then they go and research and find the real stuff.
It's why it's good to have tempered outrage about impact. Like, it's good to remember that you don't necessarily understand exactly all the outworkings of how a thing will impact people, especially about media. Like, media outrage often tends to be a little reactionary, and then like the long story is usually different than how people feel in the timeline. You know, maybe not usually, often, just often. It happens a lot. Like, you know, for instance, people were very upset about gun violence in The Matrix, right? Like that was a thing that, you know, people were in a rush to blame that stuff on The Matrix. And like now in hindsight, that just seems like a laughable viewpoint. Right. But at the time, that was a very heated, like, should we even be letting this happen? You know, like, and I don't.
Right.
I just think whenever we presume to know exactly how the outworkings are going to work out from a movie on culture, it's, you know, just a grain of salt is all I'm saying. Don't ever predict, but just like, you know, time has a way of sort of reshaping our opinions about that stuff. That's why everybody has the argument, don't have the Academy Awards the year that the movies came out. Wait 5 years, you know, because like, you don't really know.
Do you like Hall of Famer style?
Yeah. I mean, Hall of Fame is a better indicator of whether or not a thing has quality. Like, you know, like...
Right.
It's not, I mean, again, right. So this is a totally different topic, but like, yeah, I understand. Like, I probably would have been one of the people on your side of this, Abe, in 2004, who just been like, this movie is worse than if it didn't exist at all. And, you know, because I already have the feelings I have about it, so I'm just reacting to the fear that people won't have those feelings and that, you know, there's any reason for them not to have it as a bad thing. And it's like,
it just dies.
And it's like, but you don't know.
Sleep. Yeah.
You know, you really don't know that that's what the impact's going to be. I don't know. I'm a big fan of. I'm a big fan of trying to retain some sense of the fact, like, of self-awareness about how time-bound we all are. I think that's a really good thing to hold on to, especially when you're evaluating how art works. You know, like weren't most of the great, for instance, like painters rejected in their time, right? Isn't that like a thing that you always hear? Like Van Gogh was rejected in his time, and like
this is true. Yeah, a lot of them. Some of them no.
Yeah, some of them no.
Yeah.
Like Picasso, no.
You get it as it's enough that it's a thing.
So, you know, maybe we don't assume that when A Day After Tomorrow comes out, it's setting environmentalism back. I'm not reacting to your question now. I'm reacting to the way that, you know, those narratives existed in 2004.
Right. Nor am I. I'm not saying I was right in the instance. I think I've tempered my opinion by that. But it was a reaction that I had because of, I think, the context of the thing that I couldn't see out of. It's just, you know, my perception was nullified by the fact that I was in it.
Yeah, I mean, and also movie impact is such an amorphous thing. Like it's a thing that runs through your hands when you try to grab it. Like, you know, do you think Alexander Payne thought that the biggest impact of the movie Sideways would be to kill the Merlot industry? Like, you think that's what he set out to do? No, man. He's making a wisecrack.
It's the butterfly effect,
right?
baby.
I mean, like the most famous example is, you think Upton Sinclair set out when he wrote The Jungle to reform the meatpacking industry? No. You know, I don't know. This is like judging impact of things and getting outraged, which is a thing that we do a lot, is a little bit tired catching his tail, in my opinion, as a skeptic of human accuracy when it comes to perception.
Sure. I do think Upton Sinclair did think that, though, because he was
he was mad that it became about he was trying to, as I recall,
so you're saying it undermines
history.
Yeah.
He was trying to like incite people's anger about working conditions for the worker, and instead they got really mad about meat packing practices. And it was like, that's not what
Right. So yeah, it's just not saying the right thing. I misunderstood what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but sometimes you kind of just have to be the centrist that Roland Emmerich is, and just
he is a centrist.
Hold up a mirror, very much
also,
so. Just
forgive me. Yeah. Like, this is a fascinating element that I kind of threw out of this episode because I didn't know how to exactly comment on it. But like, Roland Emmerich made this movie a couple years after 9/11. Like, and he got heat for that. He got a lot of heat for that,
dude. And I don't think. I mean, for making the gesture, yes, I think you should kind of get heat for it. But like, also, do you remember the years of 2001 to 2006? This was an age of this all movies. We were like fascinated with the destruction of. It only made his career stronger.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Like I recognize that that's also kind of a no publicity is bad publicity type of thing, where it's like destroying New York just gets us into the theater, whether it's cynical or not. And that's not great.
It's just so like it's more of a response to like what culturally we went through when we when you have like a country morning, I guess they think of some fucked up shit.
But see, that's fascinating to me.
Hollywood regurgitates it back at them, and they go like, okay, yeah, that's the thing that we gotta like now. And then it's just this weird, like you said, snake eating its own tail.
That's fascinating to me because then you could say that Roland Emmerich essentially is like looking forward to our next big cultural, or what he perceives to be our next big cultural crisis. And
I think he's just rolling with the punches.
I think so too. But think about this. He understands climate change is a ways off, right? So how does he express the danger by and I mean this in like I hopefully not a completely sarcastic way. Like he 9/11s it, right? He puts it in 9/11 language so that we all like, oh, it's like that. Like he puts it in the language 9/11. Of the day, right?
Even though all of his explosions and like his like bag of tricks, as I was saying earlier, his explosions of scale predates 9/11. It's kind of like a guy who's like, ooh, I got the perfect thing for this. Even though he's not making 9/11 tales, but he is. But natural disasters movies and the genre entirely is predicated on the idea of people being fascinated by looking at wide-scale devastation. Yeah. And at the same time, we're looking for weapons of mass destruction. It's almost, you're not wrong to point out how comical it is.
I mean, 2021 Adam does not find this movie offensive. Like I don't, or even like the transgressions of the time to be that offensive, but like I might feel very differently if I lived in New York. You know what I mean? Like if I lived in New York, I might be like, "Hey man, take it easy." Like I get it, but like also take it easy.
Like I've seen enough 3 years ago, man.
Yeah, you know what I mean? You weren't here.
Yeah.
It was hard. So and I don't blame people who have that experience for reflecting that experience.
Yes.
If they don't have that experience and they're concerned about it on behalf of other people, I'm like, well, let's let them talk for themselves. If they're let them have that, let them say that.
I think there are people who will say that, though.
I think so too.
So
and if
that's enough,
those people, it's like, yeah, man, I wouldn't like that either if I was you.
And that's another blindness of Hollywood blockbusters, which seems to be a trend of this show now. We seem to point out the blind spots of Hollywood. Well, like we don't already.
Right. I mean, like it's easy for us to do because we're filmmakers, independent filmmakers who have not had to manage this kind of budget or scale, who've made a living, at commenting on movies. So like.
It's easy for us to be like, why'd you make it like that?
Right. Why didn't you inconvenient truth it? 2 years in the future, they did that.
I could have made it better.
I love that you're saying this because I know in your heart, because if your heart's anything like mine, once in a while when you've heard people's comments on your work and you're just like, oh yeah, like you just have this you have that instant reaction. And I just love to think of Roland Emmerich sitting around listening to this and being like, oh yeah, okay man, I'm going to travel forward in time and take Inconvenient Truth's tactics and fix my movie. How about you make a fucking movie? How about that, man?
Yeah, how about that? And he's not wrong about that. How about you make a
fucking Godzilla? How about you do it? I'd be like, well, fair enough.
And
fair enough.
Yeah. No, you're right about that, Roland Emmerich. I'm also my representation is.
If I just you have a Godzilla, I will make it.
I just want everyone to know what my representation is, just in case you need to know. You know,
if you would like me to prove how right I am by giving me a Godzilla, I will do that.
Hold on, I didn't even remember the name of my own representation just then. I was going to use it for a joke, and I can't even recall what they're named.
Oh, I know who it is, but do you actually want to talk about it?
No, I don't. I can't believe I can't remember it. God damn it! I'm the worst. I'm the worst filmmaker, man.
Your boys at Schifrin?
There it is. Yeah, now I recall.
Schifrin Management. That's them.
I was gonna use that for a joke. I couldn't even remember.
Hire your favorite crack director.
I know those guys. I know their names. It's not like they're not important to me. I just couldn't remember it in the moment. That I was like, yeah, like I jumped into that joke with the assumption
that it was going to fly to your head, and yet
that's just so fucking funny.
I mean, that's the thing about the pandemic. Everyone's eye. Is like it's taken away. It's taken away words from you. Like you just can't remember words now.
I literally haven't been able to think about it for over a year because what the fuck's going on?
That's right. We've been living in the LA library cooking books for a year and a half.
That's gonna change, baby. That's gonna change because I don't know if you heard, but I got a line to Roland Emmerich, so I'm thinking I might talk to him a little bit.
Abe and I would both like to thank our managers at Schifrin Management. We love you guys. Can't wait to see the work you get us. Can't wait. We're excited.
And if you don't listen to this, well, that's on you guys.
This has been a Small Beans endeavor. We're a bunch of pals who make podcasts, sketches, music, web series, and movies. The Beans always have new ideas percolating, so make sure to check us out at patreon.com/smallbeans. That's patreon.com/smallbeans, where you can browse all of our current and past content, see what we've got planned in the future, and learn how your support can help the small beans grow into huge, giant monster beans. If you enjoyed this content module, please like, rate, subscribe, or tell a friend about us. We love you!